Every week, it's my goal to share a story of someone's journey through their life and financial vineyard. We take you from their roots to the journey of their vines and the influences in the air that have helped craft their delicious lives. Like wine, life and finances have different palates that should be celebrated and not judged. Welcome to this edition of Wine and Dime with Amy Irvine. I am pleased today to have a special guest, Katie Lee, who is a managing director of Brimstone Consulting Group. Now, this topic is one that I have heard so much over the last 6 to 8 months, and that's a topic about burnout. Katie is a coach, a writer, a consultant, and for close to 20 years has worked with Fortune 500 companies, startups, academia, leaders, and aspiring leaders in the United States. Really cool. You've been to Africa and Asia to build brands and develop people and teams and solve problems and create the future. And so Kate, thank you so much for being part of this show today. We are excited to have you and to bring your experience as an associated coach, as well as the International Coach Federation designation, as well as a certificate in the brain-based coaching. I actually read that. I'm like, that's really interesting. I want to learn a little bit more about that. Because, as we financial planners, people think it's about math that we do, and it's really about habits, and it's really about the way your brain thinks. So when I read that, I'm like, that's really interesting. I want to learn a little bit more about that. But anyways, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So as you know, we start the show with the fun side of the podcast, which is the wine side. And I understand you're a Pinot Noir fan.
I am a Pinot Noir fan, primarily in the cooler weather. I like a nice rosé in the summer. I also, though, have one of my favorite wines is Pimenta, which is more of a Bordeaux. It's by a woman, Michelle Dupree, who's the only female winemaker in Bordeaux. And that is definitely a wine to check out as well.
Well, I'm going to have to get more details on that one when I'm re-listening to the podcast to make the show notes. I will have to grab her name and look up her information because people don't realize how few women just in general are actually winemakers or vineyard owners. It's a very, very limited number of women that are in that profession. So I always love to promote what they are making, creating, crafting, designing, and growing. And then, of course, I love to drink it too. So.
Well, it is one that I would highly recommend.
And Bordeaux tends to be my go-to. Like, I'm a big red wine drinker. I love reds. And here in the Finger Lakes of Western New York, we're starting to get more into that style. They're learning that there's some areas of our land that actually will grow a decent Bordeaux. It has to be specific grapes, but and they can't really call it a Bordeaux because it's not grown in the Bordeaux region, but it's that style. Yeah. Well, now that I have a new wine to go look for, I really want to walk down through your journey as somebody who has been through several cycles, I would say, in the course of my almost 30-year career of burnout, and currently working with a coach on the specific reasons why we do that and how to kind of come out of it a little bit. I read an article that you wrote that just struck a chord with me. And I think one of the things that I've been hearing an awful lot about, as I said in the introduction, is people just feeling very burnt out. This past year hasn't helped, right? We've been on the go. We've been focused on what needs to get done. We've been doing business very differently as we've needed to do. And on the other side of that, that we're now coming out of it, people now are starting to go back to their office, not necessarily wanting to go back to the office. It's adding to the length of their day. I'm just hearing a lot of clients say, I'm burnt out. Like even though I just worked from home and didn't go into the office for the last year, I'm done. Like, I just don't have the motivation I used to have. So your article really struck a chord with me, and probably because at times I've actually seen that. And I want to learn a little bit more about that topic, but how you also became sort of known for working with this and coaching people around this.
Sure. So, first, I think this is an incredibly important topic. I mean, burnout is not anything new. Pre-pandemic, about 10% of the workforce was burnt out. And now, we're looking at about 20% of the workforce is burnt out, with about half of people heading towards burnout. And burnout, to meet the criteria of burnout, Christine Maslach from University of California, Berkeley, she developed the Maslach Burnout Inventory. And that is what is used in order to evaluate what burnout is. And so, burnout requires 3 criteria: exhaustion, feelings of cynicism or negativity towards work, and reduced efficacy at work. So when you have each of those 3 things, you have hit burnout. If you don't have all 3 of those, then you are approaching burnout. And so, right now, with half of the population approaching burnout, now is really the time, if you're feeling like you are going towards burnout, to really try to take steps to mitigate that, to stop it. And, as you said, with the pandemic, there's been a lot of challenges. And, the main causes of burnout are unsustainable workload, perceived lack of control. And if you think about this past year and even now, there's a lot that we feel like we cannot control. As you brought up, the going back to the office, people, feeling like they don't have control in that decision. The third cause, insufficient rewards for effort, lack of a supportive community, lack of fairness, mismatched values and skills. So, those are all causes of burnout. And
it's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, that last one, because I think when you talked about, I think you used the word perceived unfairness, or I interpret it perceived unfairness. That's something it may or may not be true, but it's perceived, right? And that's that person's perception is their reality. And it may not even, it may be because they didn't ask for assistance and they're perceiving that they can't ask for assistance, right? Because guilty party, like a number one person that's like, won't ask for help. I have this phenomenal team that I work with every single day, and it's got to get to a pretty big breaking point before I'll reach out and say, hey, does anybody have any time to help me with this? Because my perception is they're busy. I don't want to put the workload on them. It's not that I perceive they aren't working hard. It's just, I perceive it's unfair that I try to put something on them. And so it's interesting that the last piece there is that perceived unfairness, because I think sometimes we self-reflected on ourselves a little bit. So identifying those 3 things says you're headed for, or basically in burnout. Did you go down this path from a standpoint of, learning more about helping people with burnout because of anything that you've personally experienced in life? Or was it just an area that you were really interested in or saw a lot of people experiencing?
The latter. And a lot of it comes from, burnout is not an individual issue. It is an organizational issue. So in 2019, the World Health Organization classified it as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress. And that in itself is really important, because what usually happens is organizations place the burden of, mitigating burnout or recovering from burnout on the shoulders of the individuals. But it's really an organizational issue. It is, how the organization is designed, how work happens together that really causes burnout. Dr. Maslach, she has a great analogy. If you think about a cucumber, it is, if you the cucumber itself does not turn into a pickle, right? It is if you put a cucumber in a jar of vinegar, that is what turns it into the sour pickle. So, think about the cucumber as the individual and the vinegar as the organization. And I mean, there are steps that organizations, feel that they are taking to mitigate burnout. For example, trying to bring people together with, happy hours or doing yoga, but those are really creating more stress for people. So, especially in this past year where people have felt like they are always on, they're always on the screen, they're always working. And then to say, and now we're going to have a happy hour, or we're going to bring you together for yoga. While it's a nice idea, in practice, it really can cause, additional stress, especially as people were losing their jobs and feeling like, they didn't have the ability to say no. So for me, I came to it, the issue of burnout, really thinking about, how organizations work, how they can support their people, steps that they need to take in terms of strategy. Their overall strategy, it needs to include, actions to mitigate burnout. And then also just in my work with coaching, a lot of my clients have experienced burnout or, are or have been approaching burnout. So really working with individuals to take the steps needed to, create new habits, to focus on change so that they are able to move forward and not go into burnout.
And I heard, the first thing you said was exhaustion. If somebody is starting to feel that, like, let's say that's the symptom that they have right now, and they haven't moved into the other symptoms, but they're starting to feel exhausted. If they recognize that is a symptom, because sometimes, we don't, right? So a lot of times probably we don't. We're just tired. We're busy, we're tired. We don't recognize exhaustion as that first layer of burnout. What are some of the things that you could take a step back and look at and say, is this just, I'm tired because I'm being pulled in a lot of direction, or is this headed for burnout?
Yeah, I think it's really looking at all of the various components, right? Those 6 causes of burnout. If we look at those 6 causes and you're trying to figure out, are you just exhausted? Have you been working ridiculously long hours? Has it been a really, really stressful year? Or is it that you are suddenly, you're not just exhausted, but, you're losing interest in your work. You're becoming cynical. You have, increased anger or agitation. Maybe you're even getting sick all the time. So, it's those other pieces that kind of will almost bleed into exhaustion. I mean, if you think about, burnout doesn't come on quickly. And if you think about a ball or a balloon with a slow leak in it, where suddenly it's not a sudden deflation, but it just happens over time. And so, as you said, exhaustion may be the first thing that you really notice. But then if you really start to dig into, well, why am I feeling exhausted? What is it that is causing it? Are there actually other symptoms that I am feeling? Because if you really start to reflect, there may be additional insights that you gain and that you are able to recognize. I need to make some changes, or it actually looks like I am experiencing, some of these other symptoms. I just had not been aware of it.
So as an individual who might be working for an organization, if I was experiencing burnout, and you were saying that it's actually how the organization is designed, what would I do if, other than change jobs, which I use that because that's what's happened to me in the past, right? So when I've gotten to that point where I'm just completely burnt out, my reaction is to just go work for something, like find another job, go work for a different employer. The problem that I've had over the course of my career is that, I did that several times, but the problem never got solved. You kind of go through I did anyways. I went through those stages of when I would change companies because I got burnt out. I was all excited about the new job. I was all pumped up. I was energized. I'm like, okay, this is going to be different. And then whether it's my work ethic or whether it's just the, jumping from one frying pan to another, I don't know. But if it's an organizational issue or how the organization is designed, how do I, as an individual, say, okay, I'm experiencing this burnout. How do I address it if I can't get my organization to realize they're part of the solution?
Well, I think it can even be, going to your, your manager, for example, and saying, right now I have an unsustainable workload. For example, I don't feel that I am being supported in my role, using those two examples of causes of burnout, but then going and saying, this is what I need in order to move beyond burnout, right? So being able to identify, it's an unsustainable workload. This is what I need in order to make it more sustainable. So, going in with action items, because that control is really important, right? So if you are able to say that you have control over certain things, so for example, your own path, if you have control over it or you have control over your well-being, that is really important, right? Because there may be so many other things that you can't control. And if that's what you focus on, it is going to cause more anxiety. So really being able to identify what you can focus on and taking actions around, or sorry, not what you can focus on, but what you can control, and taking actions around those things that you are able to control. But going back to what you originally said, research has shown that the majority of people who do reach burnout, full burnout, changing jobs does tend to be the most, the best way to move beyond.
The common
burnout.
solution to it is to just get away from the situation.
Sometimes you just need a big change.
And I think one of the things that now that I run my own company, it's not saying that I can't get to burnout, because I certainly can from that perspective as well. And once you start running your own company, leaving your own company makes it a little challenging. But you have more control of saying, hey, wait a minute, I have these symptoms. I need to make some changes. And you can actually be at that organizational level making the changes. I know you've done a lot of work around social enterprise, gender parity, work-life integration, and you've actually published some blogs. I think it was in the Harvard Business School Press, and was there the Supply Chain Quarterly? And I think I read, let me look real quick. Yeah, the pre-hospital disaster medicine. When I read that about you, especially the pre-hospital disaster medicine, what came to mind was, I've never worked the same kind of shifts that the medical field has ever worked. But I've worked some really long days consecutively. And those certainly create that feeling of exhaustion and losing interest and stress and resentment. I've got to think that, from a physician's standpoint or a medical field standpoint, that's probably an area of significant burnout.
It is. It's actually the medical profession is one of the, where burnout is seen the most. There's been a lot of research around, doctors in various fields, around nurses, around burnout. And, that is where a lot of burnout is. It is that exhaustion, that always on, needing to always be on. But, that is a field where there has been a lot of research around burnout.
And I've got to believe that last year didn't help that. I sat at home most of last year and did all of the work that I needed to do. I was very protected from that perspective. I mean, still very concerned and diligent and aware of what was going on around me. But for our clients that are in the medical profession, they were in the thick of it. And I mean, there were times where I just called to say, you doing okay? Mm-hmm. Not even talking about their finances in any way, shape, or form, but just how is your mental health? Because there were times where, I'm not, I wouldn't call myself an extrovert. I actually joke and say I'm a reformed introvert. But even I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I need to stretch my wings a little bit. And I'm, live out in the country. So it wasn't about just going outside. It was about some social interaction. And yet these folks were in the thick of it with more social interaction than anybody else other than grocery stores, maybe. I've got to believe they were just under an enormous amount of stress last year, creating some burnout. Are you seeing some, I guess, now, because we're not really truly out of the pandemic yet, but post-pandemic results from that?
I have not, done any work around that, but what I will say is that my research into that area has shown that there is in that field and across the board, just burnout increasing. As I said at the beginning, the prevalence has gone from 10% to 20% with more than half of people on the way to burnout, and within the medical profession, even greater percentages there, or prevalence.
So if an organization, wants to make sure that they're attracting the right people and trying to assist, especially if they're seeing some burnout happen or they're feeling it themselves, they actually recognize that it's an organizational structure. Where would they go? I'm assuming somebody like you, where would they go to actually do the work to take a peek at that and say, okay, is it our structure? Are our employees constantly, even if they're not leaving, are they experiencing burnout? And so they're not as effective as they could be, as you mentioned. So we need to make some changes. And, any organization I've ever, including my own business, it's when somebody comes in from the outside and tells us something we probably already know, but has some solutions that we may not know.
I think that's really important, right? I mean, the organization deep down, understands or knows what the issues are, but by working with an outside organization, you are able to, have that partner come in and tell you, work with you to help identify not only what the issue is, but also what actions you can take. And around burnout, as with anything, what you measure, you can change. So, if you are looking at employee engagement, for example, and you're seeing, a significant decline, or you're seeing, decline in retention, those can all be indicators of, of an issue. And I will say, the steps around mitigating burnout within an organization, a lot of it is really, it can even be going back to the basics, rather than continue with an always on mentality, making sure that there isn't the expectation to reply to or emails on the weekends or in the evenings. And, this is the responsibility of the leader as well, right? I mean, if the leader is sending emails on the weekends or in the evening, the employee is going to feel that they do need to respond, even if the email says you don't need to respond.
Schedule send is my best friend.
Yes. Schedule send is amazing. You can write the email when you're thinking about it and then, schedule it to send at an appropriate time. But, that always on mentality, back-to-back meetings, those are things that can easily be changed or somewhat easily be changed, right? I mean, it is a shift in terms of how the organization works, but those steps, those changes can have a big impact. Also making sure that people do take time off and that when people take time off, you're not contacting them. It's when people are off, they should be off. There should be no expectations that they are checking their emails, that they need to, be available. When you're off, you're off.
Yeah. Slack recently, we use Slack in our team. And they recently released, they're rolling it out slowly, but they recently released the schedule send option within Slack. And I was like doing a happy dance because we do so much communication internally with Slack just to try to keep our email boxes somewhat clean for client, emails that come in. And when I saw that was being rolled out, because I think very clearly, very early in the morning, that's my, I don't expect anybody else to be awake at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, but that's my think time. And I'm very clear. I'm very idea oriented. I can get more done between 5 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock in the morning than most people can in their entire day. But that's,
we should get together because that is my time as well. So.
But I have teammates that not so much, and I don't really like them waking up to, 4 or 5 Slack messages. And I've started to do like a document that I keep over to the side that's like, these are the messages that I want to send, so that I'm not doing some of that, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning kind of messages out to them. It's just not something I want them to wake up to. It's not the way that, I don't necessarily, it doesn't bother me, but it bothers me to feel like they feel exactly what you just said. Like, okay, well, Amy was working at, 5 o'clock in the morning and I didn't start working until 8 o'clock, because I know our team. I know they feel that way, but they also don't know that it necessarily 6 o'clock at night, at the very latest 6:30, I'm done. Unless it's a unique situation, like I'm shutting down, where other people on our team, that's their hot time. That's when and that's perfectly fine. But it does create that environment of, if you have people on the team that work late like that, and then you have people on the team that work early like me, you have that stretch of, well, it seems like everybody's working for 14 hours a day because, we're just working at different times. And we predominantly do work remotely, and we've always had the flexibility within our team, like doesn't matter when the work gets done, as long as it gets done kind of thing. But I think it has, and not just our team, but I think in the world, because of that, there is some, sense of I'm supposed to always be working, because there's a perception that a teammate of mine has worked more when it actually in the middle of the day, they maybe had to go get their kids and they didn't work for an hour or 2 hours, but that's not noticed. What's noticed is that they're working outside of hours. So when I think it's important from an organizational perspective to maybe ask some questions, right? I think as a leader, we can take a step back and try to notice some things, but sometimes maybe ask some questions about how people are feeling too, to try to identify some of those symptoms that you mentioned. But what if you're in it? What if you realize I am in burnout and I don't dislike the company, although they may not change, but I actually do like my job and I really don't want to change employers. I know that you said it starts with organizational structure, but are there things that we can do at the individual level that can help us come out of it at all, or deal with it? Maybe cope with it is a good word. I don't know.
Well, acknowledging it, recognizing that you are burnt out is really important, because then you are able to take action to change. And so acknowledging it is so important. And then getting help So as you said, talking to a coach can be incredibly helpful. Talking to, a therapist could also be, extremely helpful. But, if it's perhaps, identifying how you may also be, your habits, how you work may be contributing to burnout. So, for example, if you say, I am not going to check my messages after 6 o'clock, I'm going to turn Slack off, I'm going to turn my phone off, I'm not going to check email. That may seem really scary, especially if it seems as though there is a requirement in your organization. But, part of it could be a perceived requirement, so it is trying to understand, what have you put on yourself, and what have you, what has the organization really put on you?
Yeah, I'm a perceived person. I can perceive things that are truly just my perception. They truly are. And I think that it's kind of the way that I've explained it in the past is that it's kind of like if you were self-taught to play golf, and all of a sudden, you started taking lessons. Well, for 20 years, you've developed all of these habits on how to swing the club, how to view the field, right? And all of a sudden you have this coach come in and they're saying, turn this way or turn that way or hold the club this way. It feels foreign. It's perceived foreign, but it's actually the right answer to solving the problem, that whatever that problem is as to why you hired the coach, right? But it's perceived foreign because for so many years we've done it a particular way. So that's why I say I'm a big perceived person, because for 27 years, I've worked in the workforce in some way, shape, or form, and developed those bad habits of perception, and experience sometimes can work against you, in those situations. So having somebody come out and question, is that true or is that a perception that's untrue, I think is really helpful in asking the question sometimes, both at the organizational level and at the individual level. Kate,
gaining those. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, gaining those insights and then developing new habits, so incredibly important. The other piece that's important that I really love is the idea of resilience deposits. And so, resilience deposits is, if you think about, your bank account, you want money coming in and out. If it's just going out,
nice.
That's not, that is not ideal. And so if you are just giving in your life, in your work, you're going to, you're going to get empty at some point. And so it's, taking those, the time to, in your life to build those resilience deposits, taking vacations, exercise, really thinking about what is it that fuels and energizes you, and making sure that you have that coming in and that it's not all going out. And I really love the idea of, resilience deposits. So, I used to feel guilty, right, about taking time to do things that were enjoyable, because I had so little time, but, reframing it as resilience deposits so that I had, a bank full of, these deposits really helped me say, it's okay to kind of stop for a bit and do, do some of these things that, before I was like, I just should not take the time to do.
Yeah. So you're talking to somebody who hasn't taken a true vacation in 6 years and has one scheduled.
You do have one scheduled?
I do in
Good.
July. Yeah. And I actually, one of the things that I have asked one of my teammates to do is to actually keep my laptop because I'm one, again, I get up early. It doesn't really quote unquote bother me to get up and look at emails, respond, try to keep that email box low. But I was, thinking about this first vacation in the last 6 years that I'm going to be taking. And I'm like, I think what I could do is actually have them designated to look through my emails. There's nothing in there that they shouldn't have access to anything that is in Slack to, just turn it off, like turn off Slack. If they post something in general, I can catch up it's a week, it's 1 week. It's actually 5 business days, thinking about all that and just sort of saying, well, how can I feel rested and not, because my thing has always been, well, if I can keep up on emails, then I won't feel like stressed when I come back. But if I'm keeping up on emails, I'm not actually letting my brain rest. Right. Mm-hmm. So talking to one of my teammates about like, hey, I'm going to actually make you the keeper of my laptop. I'm going to designate somebody to keep the junk out of my email box, because I do get a lot of junk too, to forward emails from clients, because I'll have an out of office, but to, forward emails to clients to somebody that can help them, and depend on them to help me through so that I'm a better person and can be a better leader when I come back to the calendar after my vacation, and actually have a second vacation scheduled about 4 weeks after that. So like the first one's a test of like, and the second one is, nope, that worked. I'm going to do it again.
That is great. I think that, that's an incredible strategy, right? I mean, you put everything in place. So, you have that kind of control piece where you feel comfortable with, your plan. And you also recognize how important that time and space is for thinking. Netflix, a while back recognized that, the employees after vacations were coming back with incredible ideas, great ideas that helped move the organization forward. Yeah. And it was after that they decided to implement, unlimited vacation time and really enforce it, giving yourself and making sure that, your employees take that time off is so important for your health, for your well-being. Yeah.
For everybody's. We implemented an unlimited vacation policy a couple of years ago. Of course, last year was like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? But what we found is that I said, I think I'm going to have to implement a minimum. Because when it went to unlimited, people were like, well, I don't know, they're not taking it. And maybe a week here, a week there, they're not taking the time. So I think we're going to have to implement like, okay, you have to take 3 weeks vacation. I don't care when you take it, but you have to take it. And then the rest is if you need it, whatever. But it's interesting. I don't know if other firms are finding that same problem when they sort of take the barriers off and say, life gets in the way sometimes, so just go do what you need to do. But we're finding that
that's definitely been a problem, and I would say that you would not be the only organization that has moved from unlimited to minimum mandatory vacation time.
Yeah. And I think, I have to be that example. That's part of the problem. I mean, I'll admit it. Like, I'm part of the problem within our organization because I think if I started taking 3 weeks vacation, everybody else would start taking 3 weeks vacation. But I am doing 2 this year, so at least I'm doing that.
That is good. That is a step.
Kate, I'm so enjoyed this conversation and can't say thank you enough for sharing some of the identifying symptoms of burnout, ways that people can start to think about it, resources that they can, either read or go to. I do think that coaching, it probably is one of the most, I'm a big fan of any kind of like all sorts of coaching, right? But I do want to just quickly ask the question about, how did you become a coach? What sort of drove you down that path out of curiosity to help people with this kind of event, if you want to call it that, in their life?
Well, I had, I was actually talking with a friend who was a coach several years ago, and, had told her, we'd really been identifying, different pieces, kind of threads throughout my roles that where I really got my energy. And, she suggested perhaps, I should explore adding coaching to my repertoire. And I, went down the road of exploring different paths to that. I'd done informal coaching, through my various roles for, a number of years. But really wanted to take it the next step, but wanted to find the right fit for me in terms of what that would look like. And, I am someone who is analytical. I love research. And so when I found the Neuro Leadership Institute, which one can get a certificate in brain-based coaching, so that is on, what is it that makes the brain work, and how can we take that understanding to drive change, to shift habits. That resonated with me. And so I went down that path and got my certification from the Neuro Leadership Institute, and then went on to get my associate's coach certification through the International Coach Federation.
That's so interesting because, like I said, as financial planners, we're constantly trying to figure out what makes people tick. A lot of people think it's about the math, and in reality, it's actually about, why do you work? You don't work because it's work. You work because you want a particular lifestyle, or you want there's a goal generally. I love what I do in every way, shape, or form, but I still have to work. There's the resources that I earn from working get me things that I want, right? And that's what is X. I always joke with my nephews and nieces, when they're talking about math, and if they say they don't like it, I'm like, oh, you use math every day of your life. You and especially algebra, you solve for X like every single day, every single moment. You just don't realize that you are necessarily. It's such a logic, kind of relationship. And, that part of it, how the brain thinks and processes, or even going back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like why do we spend money a certain way? Is it because we've ingrained something in us, the way that we've seen something or experienced something or whatever it might be? It's neurological. And it's how many articles have we read that have said, shopping makes some people go like endorphin crazy, right? Where people like me, I'm like, oh, please don't make me go shopping. It's totally going to drain my endorphins. So it's interesting that that's the path that you went down and explored, and how that then drives, even like in this situation, it's burnout too. And sometimes people, perceive that they have to earn a certain amount of money, and it's causing them this repetitive burnout. And when we actually sit down and look at some of the needs that are basic, and then the true wants that they have, we come to a conclusion that they actually don't need to earn that kind of money.
Very
and
true.
That's very neurological. So again, very interested in that. I actually brought it up just to see what the program was out of curiosity after I read it in your bio. So, well, I just want to say thank you so much. I know I've taken more of your time than I anticipated, or maybe you did as well. But I do want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. And I know you're having some crazy weather down there today, or up there actually from where we are. So I hope you stay safe. I always like to close this show with one final sort of I guess, the dime side of the show. And that's to say, if there is one financial tip or financial piece of advice that you've been given that you've either implemented or you've seen implemented or wish that you had known earlier in your life, what would that be?
I think for me, I wish that I had recognized the importance of, saving for retirement earlier. I began my career in public health where, international public health, where salaries are not that high. And so for me, it was prioritizing my living and not my future. And, looking back, should have also included a, kind of that forward looking piece as well. But when you're right in it, it can be challenging.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's one of my frustrations in our education system, to be honest with you, is that there isn't, even in high school, because not everybody goes to college. I think we might be at 20 or 21 states now. So it's still not half that require any kind of financial education in high school. And some high schools do it anyways, but there's, it's not a required course, and it's something that affects our entire life. We weren't born to understand finance like we were born to breathe. Our body didn't just instinctively wake up someday and say, oh, I should understand finance. And yet there's this, I should know it kind of attitude, and I wish that in every program, they had a basic money class that said, even if you can save $5 a week, if you think of the course of your career and you think that every, even say 10 years, your money doubles, your 20s are such a critical time, because by the time, if you have saved, $10,000 by the time you're 30, then, by the time you're 40, that's 20. By the time you're 50, that's 40, right? By the time the math is wrong on that. By the time you're 30, that's 20. By the time, if you're doubling that all over again, that's 40. And by the time that you're looking at 40, now you're at, 80, and then 80's at 160. And that's just $10,000. And that's not saving anything more, right? So understanding that power of money is so important. So I think, it's great that you shared that for people that might be listening that are in their 20s and 30s. There's that compounding that we always talk about, but I don't think people realize that, it's that just about, if you have a 7% rate of return, then about every 10 years, you're doubling your money. And that money that started in your 20s really makes a substantial impact when you're in your 40s and 50s. So thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you so much for being a guest. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. And as this year continues to develop, more and more people, I think, are really starting to have some of those symptoms and need to take a step back and look and see, is it them? Is it the organization? What do they need to do before they go into full burnout? Because having been there, the only way that I was able to get out of it was to basically walk away from the situation and change to a different job, which actually then led to that repetitive behavior. And, hopefully some of this information can stop people from going all the way down that road and having to make those kinds of changes, those drastic changes in their lives. So thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I am thrilled that you have a vacation on the calendar and that you have a plan in place so that you really are able to unplug and enjoy it.
I'm in desperate need of decompression. The beach is calling.
And that will about do it for today's episode of Wine and Dime. You can contact Amy through the website, www.rootedpg.com, or amy@rootedpg.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram @rootedpg for the latest news. And if you have any questions, comments, or topics you would like to hear about, feel free to let us know. And don't forget to rate and subscribe the show wherever you get your podcasts. And again, thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in next time.